Today we have another week of Says, so let's get into it. Up first we have Juliet. And that had its best week in months. 95% capacity, 1,020,343 compared to last week's 983K. I don't know why it's doing so good all of a sudden. I think, maybe it's because people know Charlie D'Amelio's coming in. I know that the Backstreet Boys guys coming into the show. The Louis Armstrong musical had a decent start of 84% capacity and 637K this week, which is pretty solid, for a new show. It's a decent start. I like a show that starts with a 6 or a 7 or an 8 in front of it, and this show is doing exactly that with a 6, 7, or 8 in front of it. So if it can go to a 7 or an 8, it's on the right track. A 6 in front of it, and hopefully that can expand to a 7 or an 8. But I don't know. I feel like these bio jukebox musicals tend to be hit or miss. So I'm not 100% sure with how well it's going to do, but I think time will tell. But so far it's off to a very good start. Back to the Future played to 86% capacity and 976K last week to 896K this week. Obviously, Back to the Future, I think, is doing a lot better. I think everyone can see that if you've been keeping up with the grosses, if you know what's going on, you know that Back to the Future has had a terrible fall. Could it survive? Maybe, but honestly, with how much money they've lost, and with, I think, how much money they could potentially lose, once you get into, the January and February, I don't see it, going past the end of the year. I truly believe Back to the Future, despite doing better, has had enough bad weeks of losing money where at this point I think a closing announcement is going to happen. Maybe it won't. Maybe we will all be shocked and Back to the Future will live to see another year. Cabaret, the Kit Kat Club, played to 93% capacity and 1,054,456 last week and 1,123,538. Finally, a good week for Cabaret. I do think it's still going to close in March when their contract expires, unless they can get a big name. But again, this is such a costly revival, and it costs $1 million+ to put on in weekly operating costs, that I just don't see this. I don't see the producers saying, you know what, yeah, we should extend this, because they're having a very good week so far, but I don't know if that's gonna hold. If it can hold, and if it goes back to 1 million, 2, 1 million, 3, 1 million, 4, then we got something. So maybe that could still happen. Maybe it can turn around. But this is definitely a much better week for Cabaret. Hadestown went from 97% capacity this week and 853K last week to 781K this week. A pretty substantial drop, but it's still solid enough for Hadestown standards that it's just fine. Hamilton played to 96% capacity and 1,956,127 to 1,868,462 this week. Harry Potter continues to do all right. 90% capacity and 1,255,314 to 1,071,884. And it was just announced that they are going to be reducing Harry Potter even more into a 2-hour play instead of a 3-hour play. I didn't know it was 3 hours long, but maybe they're thinking this can help with their business, because if you look at the numbers, it's been doing pretty poorly, and maybe a big factor is that it's 3 hours long, which I did not know about, and family audiences might not want to sit through a 3-hour play. Hell's Kitchen did exceptionally well. 99% capacity, 1,427,937 to 1,554,713. Maybe Happy Ending started off with 5 performances and 81% capacity and 241,825 at the box office. The average ticket was $60. Okay, so that's why it was so bad. If you look at the advanced ticket sales, it's actually selling very decently. It's not in a horrible position. But I do think that one of the major factors is because the average ticket is probably very low. And while 81% capacity is a pretty strong start, 241K is just not good. Like, I know the average ticket was $60. I know it was 5 performances, and those are 2 big factors. But I think maybe Happy Ending is banking on, let's have lower ticket prices, get more people in, boom, we'll get an audience. But we've seen that, and a big example of that is Shucked. You know, the average ticket was very cheap, and it didn't gain that audience that it needed to sustain a big, huge, years-long run on Broadway. Where I'm standing now, it seems lower ticket price, lower weekly gross, higher capacity, but in my opinion, having a higher ticket price, which leads to a higher overall gross, is better than having a higher capacity. It just is, because if you're doing 60% capacity, but you're making $2 million, and your average ticket is like $300, which has never been done before, then you're golden, you're fine. Mulan Rouge went from 1,642,967 to 1,183,233 and 97% capacity. So a big drop, but you know, it held on a lot better than I thought it would, because Aaron and JoJo have left. Row 6 went from 87% capacity this week, and 883K to 813K, so 6 is definitely doing a lot better now. Stereophonic, 100% capacity, and 808K to 855K this week, so it's continuing to be a huge hit. Sidebar, I forgot to say Suff's weekly grosses. So Suff's did 95% capacity this week, and 767K to 880K. And obviously, the closing announcements seem to have had an impact, as this was Suff's best week in a long time. I think in a couple of weeks. So I'm glad it's going to end on a high note. And also, I want to add one more thing on to maybe Happy Ending, and that's the Dare and Chris of it all. Everyone's like, oh, Dare and Chris is going to sell tickets. And again, it seems like, you know, Dare and Chris, at least from the first week of performances, isn't the money-making, you know, star that they need. You know, I think Darren Criss does bring in a pretty nice audience, but I don't think he's a Hugh Jackman level, and I feel like you need a Hugh Jackman-esque star to make maybe Happy Ending a box office hit, and I just don't think Darren Criss has that kind of pull. I mean, we saw his numbers for How to Succeed, and they were not great, and he replaced Daniel Radcliffe when he left. Now, obviously, Darren has become a lot more famous and well-known since then, but, you know, not a lot of people are going to know who Darren Criss is. You know, Daniel Radcliffe, everyone knows who that is. It's Harry Potter. But Darren Criss, you know, Star Kid is for the new Gen Z fan base, and they don't necessarily have all of the money to see a Broadway production. You know, yes, he was an Emmy Award winner for the assassination of Gianni Versace, but that wasn't a super mainstream show the way, like, the Ryan Murphy shows are on Netflix. And so Darren Criss, for as big of an audience as he can command, I just don't think it's going to be enough to get this through a year-long run, and certainly not sustainable enough, and I just think that audience is not big enough, unfortunately, and that's the sad truth of it all. But yeah, I don't think Darren Criss has the pull that the producers maybe thought he did. Sunset Boulevard continues to be the smash hit of the season. It got pretty amazing notices from the critics, and it had 6 performances, and it still managed to sell out, or almost sell out, at 99% capacity, and 1,291,902 to 1,211,699. Tammy Faye had 1 performance, 90% capacity, and 167,504, an average ticket of $112. I've heard that is not selling very well, and that people did not like it. So we could be looking at a pretty big flop in Tammy Faye, but again, it's too early to tell. When we get a full week of performances, we can fully digest it. The Book of Mormon went from 995K last week to 935K this week, so very solid, and 97% capacity. The Great Gatsby continues to be great at the box office, going from 1,271,486 to 1,266,300 and 93% capacity. The Notebook went from 677K to 715K, its highest week in months, and 90% capacity. The Outsiders went from 1,502,467 to 1,468,609, selling out with 102% capacity. And Water for Elephants went from 763K to 818K and 72% capacity, so a much improved week for Water for Elephants, even though it is closing. So overall, a very good week for most musicals, and some surprises. Back to the Future did better than we thought, and Juliet did better than we thought. The Louis Armstrong musical came off to a stronger start than I was thinking. Cabaret had a pretty big increase. Mulan Rouge didn't fall as hard as we thought, and maybe Happy Ending did not have a good start. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.